This is the video that the memers have been waiting for. Here are my top 5 picks for the most fun decks in Hearthstone, thanks to Perils and Paradise. I've talked about a lot of meta nonsense, but now it's finally time to have some fun with Hearthstone. So if you like fun, go ahead and hit that subscribe button because we're just gonna go ahead and jump right into it. Subscribe to the whale OTK. Now I'm gonna tell you right now, most of these decks are probably not going to be that good. They're not gonna be optimized. They are not focused on being good. They are focused on doing one thing in particular in order to have fun. So play these decks against your friends. Play this on the ladder if you want to, like disrespect somebody with the potential of the beached whale OTK Druid, the whale TK Druid as I like to refer to it as. This deck is just trying to do one thing. Play Crazed Alchemist with a bunch of whales. So the whole point of this deck is to play a bunch of little minions with like forest seedlings and living roots, and you can discount it with the Lifebinder's Gift. So if you have a bunch of little minions on the field, you can play the artist. You can play Calligrapho, Cauliflower, whatever you want to call him. You can play him, and then the 1/1s will turn into 420 minions. And if any of those minions survive, you can play Crazed Alchemist with this hilarious combo. And before you say, wait a minute, Clark HELLSCREAM, that sounds impossible. Did you do that? Yes, I did. 100% win rate. There's the stats. I did it one time, so you guys know that it's possible, and that's the exact style of deck that we are going to show you today. A bunch of nonsense, a bunch of memes, and a lot of these decks I have actually played myself, so I can give you a good analysis of how bad these decks really are. But trust me, the worse the deck is, the more fun you get to have when you finally pop off the win with it. And moving along, I want to show you guys my latest process with the Shadow Aranna archetype that I've really been trying to pop off with. I have Shadow and, Aranna seem to go together perfectly, so you can keep ourselves alive. And this is the list that I believe that I was showing you guys in my previous video with like Fizzle as well as Sheriff Barrel Rim. But honestly, this deck is really not performing that well. I really wish that like I could give you, an underdog story talking about how I finally broke through the Hearthstone meta. But unfortunately, I feel like I'm gonna have to put my Demon Hunter process on hold for now until a bounce patch comes out, because this deck is just not performing as well as I would hope. But that didn't stop me from having 2 other lists that I'm going to show you, really trying to showcase how Aranna Demon Hunter is not only fun, but it has major potential if it gets just a few more cards or if the meta slows down. So the latest additions that I have made to this deck is that I have tried to make it more tempo-oriented with cards like Sock Puppet Slither Spear, but there is one other card that I feel like is actually a 100% core card, needs to be in every deck going forward. Ball Hog. Now, a lot of people are like, wait a minute, this card doesn't seem that good, but if you really analyze this card, it is 4 mana, essentially gain 9 life, because not only does it have a Battle Cry and Death Rattle of deal 3 damage, but it also has Lifesteal attached to that, so if you play it and then it dies, it'll already deal 6, and if your opponent trades into it, that's already another 3, so that is 9 healing total, and if you pair that with Through Fell and Flames, you can potentially get a trade with your Ball Hog, have it survive, so that is just an insane amount of value to where this card can potentially heal for up to 14 damage if you do put on the Fell and Flames. So yeah, that's a really big comeback potential and is a really good, follow-up after you play your Sigil of Time. So I think that Ball Hog absolutely deserves a spot as a core place in this deck, but everything else about this deck is just, just quite not there yet. Like, it is so close to being like a really good deck, but unfortunately, you have to have the right draws against aggro with cards like Going Down Swinging, the Eye of Shadow, as well as Burning Heart in order to get all of that damage. But if you don't like the idea of running this version of the deck, we actually decided to try the Outcast version with Glaive Tar, and it actually yielded some pretty interesting results. So I got a lot of comments on my previous video talking about what happens if we just go all the way with Glaive Tar and Outcasts. And honestly, there's a little bit of, some good news from this and some bad news from this. And the bad news is that Going Down Swinging suddenly becomes extremely awkward in this kind of deck. And I've played about 20 games with this new Outcast version of the deck as of like yesterday. I really, tested a lot of different archetypes and a lot of different styles of this deck. And well, unfortunately, Going Down Swinging was the most awkward awkward card because unless I had it paired with Burning Heart ready to go, the whole point of this deck is to have Glaivetar equipped until the very end, and if you play going down swinging with Glaivetar, it just makes things awkward. And so you have to play this either with your first Glaivetar, because if you do it the second one, then it'll just break it and then you don't have the combo. But the whole point of this deck is to use the Glaivetar to play a bunch of Outcast cards, break it when you play the Aranna, so that way you can draw a bunch of damage cards into Fatigue, and there are plenty of Outcast cards that are very good right now. Security, Spectral Sight, Wayward Sage, Paraglide, all fantastic cards to put into the deck naturally, and we've even gone so far as to put cards like Bartendobot in the deck in order to try and guarantee that we can get those Paraglides to only draw for us, so that way our Wayward Sages can discount some cards, because this deck is the perfect amalgamation of like tempo, combo, throwing cards out of hand, and controlling your opponent. It's a really weird deck, but you're mostly just playing for the board with cards like Crimson Sigil Runner, Patches, Bartendobot, and Security in order to, you know, keep the early game open up, you know, and just try your best to not just die immediately. And the Eye of Shadow has become a one of now because you only have so much attack sustaining power in this deck since we cut the momentums. But again, Ball Hog serves a very necessary role in this style of deck, so that's why we kind of went with more of this like tempo approach. And a huge shout out to Quark, who is responsible for this list, as well as one other list that we'll be talking about. But yeah, this is just my way of saying I have really tried my hardest to make Aranna Demon Hunter as powerful as possible, but unfortunately, unless a balance patch comes soon, I don't see this card making any meta relevance or having any meta relevance for quite some time. Now, next up is a deck that I really wanted to put on like my top 5, you know, deck videos, but unfortunately, I didn't get enough data with this deck in order to really be confident about it. But recently, I saw the competitive player Casey, who used to play a lot of, you know, competitive Hearthstone. He's like, you know, I'm not really a big fan of the game right now, but this deck in particular, and he did very well with it, is bringing me back into the game and is making me love decisions, because this deck has a lot of decisions, even though it may seem like it's all in on the Gaslight Gatekeeper. But the Gaslight Gatekeeper and the Giants are not the real star of this deck. It's actually Griftah, but to a larger extent, Tidepool Pupil. Oh my god, try saying that 10 times fast. But the Tidepool Pupil is extremely versatile with this deck for one reason. Bouncing a bunch of breakdances to where, you know, you can play Sonya into 1 mana Tidepool in order to get another Tidepool, so then you can play Breakdance for 1 mana, get another 0 mana Breakdance, and suddenly you can literally create an infinite loop of Tidepools bouncing each other, bringing back the Sonya, bringing back the Tidepools for 1 mana, so you can rinse and repeat with a bunch of 8 drops, with a bunch of Griftah value. If you have like the 1 mana spell, it's really good, because obviously this is extremely good if you have the deal 6 to where you can easily deal over 30 damage with this card if you discover it. So that's the main reason why this deck was popping off originally. But then people started figuring out this weird, you know, infinite cycle that's like actually good if you can pop it off. But yeah, unfortunately, this deck is a little bit held back by the aggressive meta. So this is definitely, you know, a difficult deck to play already, on top of the fact that it just might get stormed by, you know, like a 1, 2, 3, 4 curve by a Paladin, because this deck is very dependent on early game Dubious Purchase, as well as getting that Gaslight Gatekeeper by turn 4 and playing it for value. It's very important that you hit these thresholds, and when you don't, it kind of brings you back a little bit. But it doesn't mean it's the end of the world. It just means that the deck just really loses percents if it misses these very key thresholds. But regardless, a good player can do fantastic things with this deck. Ziliak's shenanigans for 1 mana are still possible, unless they decide to change the ticking modules, so, you know, keep an eye out for that. Who knows? Ziliak's is getting a lot of buzz right now, and it's not just because of the elusive. It's also because of ticking module, and to a lesser extent, the lifesteal module as well. But yeah, Griftah Rogue, very fun right now. Decisions matter, and this deck actually has, like, so many options to where if you love Rogue, you will absolutely love this deck. All right, hold on. Don't say anything. Clark HELLSCREAM, this is a fun YouTube video about Hearthstone decks. Why would you include Priest in this deck? Let alone a Priest deck that is all about playing Puppet Theater and playing Pip in order to copy the cards that you get from the Puppet Theater. Dude, I will say right now, this deck is everything that I hate about Priest, but I gotta admit something. I had fun playing it yesterday when I was streaming it, and there will be a video talking about this deck in greater detail, because apparently this actually has some sustaining power against some of the meta-relevant decks right now. So who knows, if there's a balance patch that's coming soon, this could be like a very real deck that I might talk about in a little bit of a different light. But oh my dear lord, Location Priest. The whole point of this deck is just to play random cards, really. It's kind of like a Thief random generation Rogue random generation priest, to where you just kind of, you know, get stuff that's good and you add it to your hand and you play the cards. Sounds very basic, but the great, you know, puzzle of this deck is figuring out, all right, I have all this nonsense. How do I win with it? And usually your main win condition is going to be to essentially gaslight your opponent into playing a minion. And something that I did that I will probably make a video about in the future is I went up against a Death Knight and they played Primus against me. They stole something's HP, they gained it, and so I had, I think, 3 Puppet Theaters on the field, so I stole 3 of their Primuses, didn't even have enough value to pip them for even more. So it's just like, this deck quickly goes from, oh god, I'm doing nothing, to, oh my god, I have everything and I don't know what to do. So if you love trying to like figure out like a mess of options and just figuring out the nonsense that Hearthstone can generate, then this is the deck to go for. And to make this deck even more insane, it originally did not have Prison of Yogg and a Location Priest, so I was like, okay, we gotta change that. We're putting in the Yogg. We still have the Scrapbooking Student. So yeah, there's lots of ways of getting extra locations, extra Puppet Theaters, extra Prisons of Yoggs, and you even have the Giants in order to really go all in on the locations of this deck. So yeah, I'm gonna give this deck a certified, you know, D for dank, you know, good effort behind it, and honestly, I had fun playing it. So if you're a Priest degenerate, you will enjoy it too. Have fun. Play some Prison of Yogg Sarans and just let the random flow through you. I know we've been talking a lot about Demon Hunter, but this will be the last Demon Hunter deck we talk about. But Big Demon Hunter is something that Quark actually tried to make work. Again, super shout out to this guy who's been helping me out with a lot of different deck archetypes and just, you know, generally talking with me about, you know, the process of deck building, because it's really important that you don't tunnel vision on things. Because like case in point, with the Ball Hog we were talking about earlier, like I kept looking at this card and immediately dismissing it without realizing, wait a minute, this is such a good card for the archetype that we're building. And so he decided to try and make Cliff Dive work in Demon Hunter, and I don't think I've seen anybody talk about this whatsoever. Not at all. There's not been any conversation, and I haven't even thought about it because I immediately dismissed this archetype. But you want to know something? When you play Sylvanas and you're still a Ziliax, it's still a fantastic way of denying your opponents. There's also some other ways of kind of getting around the Cliff Dive requirement, because if you pull a Magtheridon, for example, that's going to stay on the field. He's going to be dormant. He's going to be dealing some damage, and then suddenly you'll have a 12-12 that's just ready to go, man. You can't put the Mag back into the deck, man. Once you open that box, it's open. You can't put the wrapping back there. You know, you tore through it, you child. It's Christmas. What do you expect? But regardless, the way that he really, you know, was inspired to build this deck is that he was thinking, you know, what if I were to play Dorian into Umpire's Grasp and get like a big demon in the process? And unfortunately, it just kind of became a shopper Demon Hunter with like mag potentials as well. So I don't really know how good this Dorian idea is, but he told me that he went like 5-3 with the deck around like top 200 legend. And there's even like, you know, some other random generation with cards like this to discover a Death Rattle minion that you've played this game. So it's like CCG value is something that's kind of interesting with this deck in order to get some OG Demon Hunter cards. And usually when I generate this card randomly, it's not that bad, but running it in the deck for, you know, the full cost and all that kind of stuff, not too sure about that. But, you know, maybe you get some Dorian value. I don't know. This is just kind of a weird deck. Again, I have not tested this myself. But one other thing that I got to keep in mind that I got to let you guys know about is what if, you know, just bringing back Argus can be really good in Demon Hunter? And what if you could somehow run Rest in Peace if you were to somehow put like Aranna into the deck or something like that? Like, that's something that I would really like to like explore with Big Demon Hunter, is putting in like these Rest in Pieces in order to get like big like Illadaris or something. But unfortunately, I feel like this is just way too slow, way too, you know, way too clunky to put into the deck. But I don't know. I just wanted to give you guys some ideas of other ways of building the deck. But remember, if you want to build the Quark special, your win rate may suffer because these decks are very specific, and any misplays will absolutely destroy your chances of having any success. Because when you jump off a cliff, one of two things happen: you live or you die. Kinda grim, but it's the truth. Next up, I've got a Dane special, and the reason why I'm including this deck is because he made it his goal in order to try and utilize Maestra to its fullest potential. So the whole point of this deck is that, yes, it is just Drilling Rogue, it is just Mining Rogue, it's Excavate Rogue, Scorpion Rogue, whatever the hell you want to call it, but the point of this deck is that he made it his goal in order to play Maestra to transform your class and win with every single Excavate reward in every other class. That is right. If you were to discover, let's say, Tamsin, the Warlock hero from the past, and then you transform yourself into a Warlock, if you go through all of the excavation steps, you get the Azure Knight Snake. Doesn't that sound fun? That sounds like a lot of fun. Now keep in mind there are some classes that do not have these kind of excavate rewards, such as like Priest, for example, or like Druid. So if you're trying to like, you know, focus on, you know, winning the game, make sure that your timing of your hero card is appropriate, because the last thing that you want to do is to transform into a Druid and then suddenly your excavate cards are just doing absolutely nothing. So before playing the hero card, you might want to get yourself a Scorpion so you can at least do your breakdance shenanigans and play typical Mining Rogue. But again, if you want to transform into a Warlock, if you want to transform into a Paladin, into a Shaman, God forbid, if you ever want to try and make the Azure Knight Murloc ever work, then yeah, you could play Maestra, Mask Merchant, you can transform your class, and you can play some very wacky Hearthstone decks. And the other cool synergy with this deck that a lot of people may not immediately realize is that if you play Maestra, Mask Merchant, and then you transform your class into anything that's not Rogue, your Snatch and Grabs actually immediately transform into 0 mana cards, because you become the class that's, you know, not Rogue. You've had a bunch of Rogue cards that you've played this game that's technically cards from another class, so they immediately become 0. So that's a fun little interaction that makes the Maestra, you know, gimmick a little bit more serious. Maybe there's like a way of making this good in the future, but for all of you deck builders and all you meta breakers out there, keep this synergy in your mind, because the first time I saw this, I was genuinely impressed. Next up, we're going to talk about 2 Jombre specials, and these are like decks that I thought would be really good, but they're going in the meme category, because unless you're Jombre or unless you're just really good at the game, it might be very difficult to get these decks to work. But Tempo Mage is something that I really thought would be good, because I thought Concierge into a bunch of like Divine Brews or Sunscreens from the Life-Saving Auras would be a very powerful combo of just making a really big minion that is never going to go away. But unfortunately, that just doesn't happen when Concierge into swipe into a bunch of spell damage is just vastly superior in Druid. So unfortunately, this is why I'm like on the edge of like Concierge being like a problem, because yes, it's kind of a problem in Druid, but if we take any action with this card, it's just gonna make it worse in every other archetype, such as like Tempo Mage. This deck just becomes extremely worse, because now you can't make like a big Slither Spear out of nowhere with a bunch of Sunscreens that cost 0 mana. Now granted, should I be complaining about a bunch of 0 mana interactions? Probably not, but this is like kind of a fun example of how, like, you know, Concierge into distribute your buffs among a bunch of minions in order to turn your 1/1s into like threatening minions. I think that's kind of fun, especially in the Mage archetype. And if you can like do this with like Rayla, for example, I thought this was going to be a very powerful like turn 7 combo, very similar to like how Token Druid would work with like Violet Teacher and stuff like that. But we gotta be honest with ourselves, this is 2024 Hearthstone. This kind of idea is just way too slow. But I just wanted to let you guys know where I'm coming from in terms of defending this card, because I do think it has some fun applications, even though it does have the 0 mana problem interactions that a bunch of people kind of complain about. But one other thing to keep in mind in terms of talking about 0 mana applications, this is just a really good card in this deck, because you could do something similar with the Heifer, and you could just do, you know, a bunch of 0 mana cards all at once, and you can just win the game that way. So if you play double Elemental Companion, that is probably going to be your best way of bursting your opponent for nothing. But you've also got cards like Mantle Shaper that really incentivize you to play these 1 mana cards, so that way you can play this as early as, I think, turn 2, turn 3, depending on how many 1 mana cards you have in your mulligan. And then you have Khadgar as like that last piece of the puzzle to sometimes, you know, like, hey, I need a 6 mana card, this game's gonna go on for a while, I just need to get some random value. So cards like Khadgar as well as Tide Pools can kind of be like those cards that are very necessary to bridge the gaps to the victory, to the lethal. But every now and again, these cards just feel like they just don't really do all too much, because unfortunately, if Tempo Mage doesn't have tempo and doesn't take over the board, it doesn't really do all too much. But overall, I like this deck. I wanted to showcase it. I played it myself, didn't really have that much success with it. But if you're someone that really loves Tempo Mage, this is probably the best way of playing it, and I definitely agree that Jombre is a fantastic deck builder to where you should play a lot of his decks. And speaking of which, we're going to keep talking about Jombre decks. Incindius is another deck I really wanted to be good, and I have talked about this deck before. But the games that I've played with this deck actually felt very good because cards like Frosty Decor are very real cards that can help you sustain as long as you're not going up against something like Druid that's essentially dealing infinite damage. But against, like, you know, a Demon Hunter, for example, this deck has a lot of game against aggro in particular with cards like Melemental, Aftershocks, Volcano, obviously, and even like Altered Chord as an actual card you're running in the deck, not only to give support to Hagatha, but to give support to some of these overload cards that you've added into the deck, as well as what you could potentially discover from cards like the Amphibious Elixir. I kind of wish there was a way of like adding the Lightning Reflexes in this deck, but how this is very similar to Nature Shaman is how it utilizes the Novice Zapper. Because obviously you have Zapper enabled in the Altered Chord, but if you didn't know this, spell damage affects the Incindius eruptions as well. So if you play your Shutter Block, if you play Incindius, and you have, you know, 15 eruptions in the deck, they immediately go to 2 damage thanks to Incindius. So if you can play double Zapper into Gaslight Gatekeeper, that is by far the best way of drawing all of the cards. And keep in mind, you have the 1/1 mini accompanying the Gaslight Gatekeeper. So if you have a lot of cards in your deck, or if you have a lot of cards in your hand, it's very likely that you draw all the eruptions in your deck in order to kill your opponent. So this is just a really fun deck that I keep highlighting because I want it to be good. Maybe it becomes better after a balance patch. But yeah, Incindius, the only other way to really play it is in Highlander Shaman. I will go ahead and shout it out in this video, and I kind of have a funny idea of how to play that deck without playing Reno. But yeah, Highlander Shaman might be something you want to look forward to if this is your favorite interaction from Perils in Paradise. Who needs to play Location Priest when you have Location Rogue that goes all in on playing the best location in the game? I've already made a video talking about this. You guys have probably already seen this deck, but I have to also say that this was the very last deck that was played by World Champion Pocket Train before, and I quote him, he goes into the night and never plays Hearthstone ever again. He has essentially quit streaming. He's said that he has done all of his achievements. He's done everything he would have ever hoped through streaming, and now it is time to do the next part of his life, the next chapter in the Pocket Train journey, and this is what he leaves us with: a beautiful deck, Prison of Yogg-Saron, with the capability of playing a bunch of scrapbooking students with Shadow Steps, so you can just keep throwing the Yogg Prison to the face over and over and over again. And like I said, I played this deck. It's very fun. It's not very good, obviously, but if you want to do something wacky with your friends, if you want to put them in the Prison of Yogg-Saron in order to show them the true power of randomness, then this is definitely one of the most fun decks that you could be playing right now. But yeah, Jailbird Rogue, thank you, Pocket Train, for your service, because I can't think of any other streamer that would be ballsy enough to play a deck like this. And one of the last decks that we're going to be talking about is Control Druid, another deck that I have made a video about, again, going all in on Incindius. But I have some very bad news. Tic Tac recently posted a video on his YouTube channel, actually. He's made a YouTube channel now, talking about all of his wacky innovations within the Hearthstone scene, because he keeps optimizing this deck to where now it doesn't run Incindius. He goes all in on running Forbidden Fruits. And I don't even think the deck runs Ignis. It's just the whole point of the deck is just to play a bunch of new heights, gain a bunch of mana, sustain yourself with, you know, a bunch of, lifesteal from the Ziliax, and then you can play Forbidden Fruit in order to gain a bunch of attack and then just kill your opponent when it's time. So yeah, Incindius is probably not the way to play it, but damn it, I love this deck. I'm going to keep talking about this archetype. I just made a video talking about it if you want to see it in action. But one thing that is very sad is that if Hydration Station or if Ziliax get nerfed soon, then this deck is definitely going to be struggling a lot to where I don't think Incindius is really going to see that much play in Druid without some kind of like weird like Dorian Flower Child combo possibility. But yeah, if you want to play Incindius Druid, now is the time before this deck gets nerfed, because I doubt Hydration Station is gonna stay in this condition for very long. And the last deck that we're going to be talking about is Rainbow DK. That is right. I put it in the top 5 decks in Legend, top 5 decks on Diamond through Legend, as well as the top 5 decks in Hearthstone, because I just absolutely love this deck. Now, granted, I did give you guys 13 different decks to try out, but this is definitely my #1 most fun deck to play right now, because not only is it good, it also wins games of the Climactic Necrotic Explosion. I literally don't want anything else in Hearthstone. This is the only card that I want playable. I have it golden for a reason. I'm never getting rid of it, and it needs to be good, otherwise Hearthstone is bad. Am I right, ladies and gentlemen? If Rainbow DK is not #1, then I don't want nothing to do with Hearthstone. So if you want to get some easy wins, as well as potentially go to Legend with this deck, now is the time to play it, because I imagine if anything happens with a balance change, this deck is still going to be good, but it's a matter of how exactly we're going to tech it against the meta right now, because the reason why I believe that this is the best version of Rainbow DK currently is because it goes all in on countering, you know, minions, dealing with the board, potentially dealing with like the 1/1s from the Shaman, so that way they can't just play Wave of Nostalgia against you and just immediately cheese the game. There's, you know, Eliza into Ghouls Knight, as well as like an actual win condition to deal like 20 damage, which is insane, personally. Absolutely insane. You have Corpse Bride into Stitch Giant. I've already talked a lot about this deck, but it just supports the Climactic Necrotic Explosion perfectly, to where this becomes a great sustain card, as well as an actual win condition lethal you can go for. So yeah, Rainbow DK, my favorite deck in the game right now, and it does become better thanks to Perils and Paradise cards, thanks to cards like Dreadhound. Fantastic 10 out of 10 card. This is probably going to go in every single DK from going forward. And yeah, I love Rainbow DK. 10 out of 10 deck. Play it now. But there you guys have it. Those are my top 5 quote-unquote favorite decks of the expansion, to where we have a bunch of funny decks, a lot of really good ideas that just aren't strong enough, as well as some terrible ideas that could sometimes cheese a win, like the Jail Rogue. So if you like these kind of decks, and if you copy any of these deck codes, you definitely need to be subscribed to the channel right here, right now. And let's see. Say hi King Plush if you made it to this point, because he's such a good little boy and he deserves all of your praise. So thank you all for making it to the end of this video. Special thanks to all of our Patreon members that help support the channel and keep us going full time. And a huge special shout out to everyone that is watching this video as well, because these top 5 videos are honestly some of my favorite things to do, because I get to just show you fun decks and explain some of the coolest ways of actually having fun instead of just winning. Winning doesn't need to be your priority, having fun is, and these are the greatest decks that I believe you will definitely have fun with, as long as you don't play them in ranked and then just get farmed. Play these against your friends, it'll be a good time. But thank you so much for making it to the end of this video, and we'll see you for the next one.